Hello, welcome back to my channel, The Jellyfish Journals. My name is Susie, and I know this video is way late, and I am going to do my best to remember these books that I read in January, as well as my thoughts on the books. But I do apologize. I don't think my reviews and my thoughts are going to be as in-depth as they normally are. I really did try to get this filmed, but I'm kind of funny and I don't like filming the ones where I am face to face in front of the camera if anybody's here at home. My husband and stepson just left to go to the store, so I'm hoping I have maybe 30 minutes at least to get this recorded. And then I can always just edit it later, but at least it will be recorded and on my phone. So having said that, I'm gonna jump right into things, but I do recommend, if you don't feel like I've said enough about it, if I remember my review, let me say it this way. If I remember that a book is 5 stars, but I can't remember why it's 5 stars, dig into it a little bit more. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump on in. The first book that I read in January of 2025 is The Bee Sting by Paul Murray. And this book was high on my to-be-read list. I'll have to make a video about it later, but I do read a lot of books that have bees in the title, things about bees in the title. A bee on the cover will catch my eye. It's kind of strange, I guess, but I do want to make a video of the bee books that I've already read. But there was something about this one that was also a little bit intriguing. So it's about this family of 4, a dad, a mom, a daughter, and a son. And just kind of the different, not courses their lives take, but kind of the different courses their lives take. So you get to jump into the dad's life and what he's up to and what he thinks of his family, and the mom and the daughter and the son. And it's one of those books where obviously, since they're a family, all of their lives intertwine. But there's obviously some complications and some tragedy and some things that are kind of like, what is going on here with this family? The other thing that's interesting about this book, and I'm trying to remember, I think it was the mom, but the author is super interesting, Paul Murray, the way he writes things. So when it's the mom's turn to tell the story, there is no punctuation in her part of the story whatsoever. And I think that's supposed to be a nod to her scrambled brain, and just kind of the way she looks at life and the way she feels about things is just constantly going. There's no time to slow down even for punctuation. I could be wrong on that, but it definitely made it a little tricky to read at times. The ending is not normally the kind of ending I would like in a book. Actually, it's the kind of ending that would frustrate me in a book. But for some reason, the ending of this book felt like the perfect ending for this book. So I did give this book 5 stars. I was glad to be able to give it 5 stars. It's a bit of a chunky book. I'm looking right now. It's 643 pages. So it's a bit of a hefter. The cover's beautiful, but I recommend this. It's different. It's not really a thriller. It's just a contemporary fiction, but it was definitely an interesting read. The next book that I read in January was The New Couple in 5B, and this is by Lisa Unger. I think I bought this at the library for $1. It was a typical thriller, I would say, what my friend and I call popcorn thrillers, where after you read something a little heavier or a little heftier or maybe a little out of your normal genre, sorry, that was a big car that went by outside. It's just the kind of book that's just a very quick thriller, easy to read. This one is about a couple who unknowingly inherits this fabulous apartment in New York City. And there's, of course, a mystery attached to it, and it involves neighbors and the doorman and some other kinds of things. And it was definitely predictable in some ways, as a lot of thrillers are, but it was also kind of just interesting in a lot of ways, like kind of also what's going on here. And something's up, something's fishy, of course, but I didn't dislike it. It wasn't my favorite thriller ever. I think I gave it 3 stars. Just because if I remember right, as I was reading it, there were things that were like, oh, of course, of course, of course. And so, nothing against Lisa Unger. I did try to read the other book they mentioned on the front, Secluded Cabin Sleep 6. In all fairness, I was trying to listen to it on audiobook. And if you've watched any of my videos, audiobooks are hit or miss with me. I did not finish her other book. Again, I do think if I picked it up in like an actual print version, it probably would have been a little easier to read. But so far, I'm not feeling like she's one of my favorite authors. But if you like a popcorn thriller, as I like to call them, then this is a good book for that. The next book that I finished in January was an audiobook, and it was called What the River Knows. And this book was really good. I gave it 4 stars, mostly because the characters were, younger. I don't relate quite to that. It's kind of like a young female Indiana Jones in a lot of ways. There's a little bit of magic and mystery wrapped into this book, but she basically, I want to say, is in, I think it's Brazil, and her parents are archaeologists in Egypt. And so they pass away, or I think she gets a letter that says that they pass away. And so she decides she is just getting on a ship and going out there. And this is like, I feel like it was in the 1940s. So it was at a time when women didn't typically do that by themselves at 17, 18 years old. But she gets on a ship to Egypt and meets a bunch of people. And then there's this whole journey and discovery along the way. I thought it was really good. It was an audiobook. I have learned that if characters in an audiobook have an accent, it makes it feel more real to me than if I had just read it. Because if I read a book in my own head, of course, everybody has an American voice because it's the voice in my head, and I have a very American voice. So something about listening to a book where people talk with the British accent or with an Egyptian accent, that was kind of a nice touch. And she has a Hispanic accent. I feel like it's Brazil. That doesn't sound right though. But anyway, she's from South America and travels to Egypt, and then a whole lot of exciting things happen along the way. So I did give this one 4 out of 5 stars. I think at some point it kind of just felt like it could have ended like 3 or 4 times, and it just kept going on and on and on. And I think that's why I gave it 4 stars. I felt like there were a lot of places it could have ended and wrapped up neatly, and then something else happened and it kind of drug it out a little more. But I definitely recommend this book, especially if you are doing a read around the world type thing and you want a book set in Egypt or that part of the world. That's a good fit for you. The next book I read was my reading challenge for January, and that was Murder Your Employer. And I cannot rave about this book enough. So I have plans to do another video about all the books that I've bought because the cover was beautiful. And some of them I've read already, some of them I haven't. But we all do it. We all buy a book based on the cover because it's beautiful, or it catches our eye, or the title is written well or something. This cover is so beautiful. It's probably hard to tell from there, but there's like gold foil on it, and there's a gate right here that's kind of washed out and hard to see. It says Volume 1. It's meant to be like a textbook, a fancy textbook. There's roses on it, and it's called Murder Your Employer, the McMaster's Guide to Homicide. And so I haven't read anything like this ever. The premise behind the book is that there is this school, I think called the McMaster's School. I can't remember. I'm trying to see real quick. Yeah, the McMaster's Conservatory. And the idea is that if you have a plan to murder somebody, it doesn't have to be your employer, you have an opportunity to go to this school. And at this school, they will teach you everything you need to know about murdering people. You take dance lessons in case you have to murder somebody at a ball. You take language lessons in case you need help from somebody who speaks another language. I mean, it really is in depth. But they also have to vet you. So they won't just let anybody into this school who wants to kill somebody. You have to meet certain criteria. So they interview you. It costs a lot of money to go to this school. You're never allowed to talk about this school. And you can either pay the money yourself, or in the case of one of the characters, you can have a sponsor who pays for you and you have no idea who it is. So basically somebody is supporting you murdering somebody else, and they're paying for your education to do it. So this book followed, I believe it was 3 different characters and their education in how they're going to murder somebody, who they're going to murder, why they're going to murder that person, and whether they were able to carry it out or not. And man, highly recommend this book. 5 stars, hands down. I would give it 6 if I could. Definitely a keeper. I will probably actually reread this in the future one day. Murder Your Employer. After Murder Your Employer, I read my first classic of the year, which was The Alchemist. I did look up a classic, what a classic is. To me, classic means it's really old. I think this came out in the 1980s, which that would make me really old, and I don't think I'm really old because I also came out just before the 1980s. But when I did Google a classic, it had definitions like it has themes and morals that stand the test of time, and it's applicable to many ages and many cultures and things like that. So it seems like there's classics like we know them, like Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility. And then there's classics that are more of a modern classic. And this, I believe, was considered more of a modern classic. So you have this guy who's a shepherd, and he hears about this treasure in Egypt where the pyramids are. And he goes on this journey to get, I think he starts off in Spain, Andalusia, something like that. And he goes off on this journey to find this treasure that's supposedly buried at the bottom of the pyramids. And it's really just about how he gets there, like his travels and things. I think what blew me the most away about this book is there are just so many quotables in this book. I could see why, if a classic is something that has to have morals or themes or lessons for any age, anywhere in the world, this was full of them. If you're an annotator, this would definitely a book you would annotate back and forth. I even considered annotating in this book, and I am not an annotator at all. It's really kind of phenomenal. I gave this book 5 stars also. I will say, I will remember that the book had a lot of amazing quotes in it. I can't tell you what any of those quotes are off the top of my head, and since I did not annotate it, I can't pull those out. But I think I could see myself going back through and looking for quotes out of here to pull out and put in my journal or write in a frame and hang it on the wall somewhere. I mean, there was a lot of things in this book that I stopped and reread, and I went, wow, that is so true. And it was this shepherd boy recognizing and realizing all sorts of different things. So I definitely recommend The Alchemist if you haven't read it. It's not very long. It's a short book. This one is just, I love the cover. It's just really pretty. So the front has this sunshine, the back has a moon. It's by Paulo Coelho. And I think at first I read something in the beginning, a foreword or something. And I think in the beginning, it was like published and nobody liked it, nobody cared, nobody knew about it. And then somewhere along the way, kind of like, I think Shawshank Redemption, it got noticed and then became more popular. So it's worth it. I recommend this one for sure. After The Alchemist, I finished my digital book, which was called The Woman in the Moonlight. And this book I gave 3 stars to. It was a free Kindle. Most of my digital reads are always free Kindle books, like if you're an Amazon Prime member. And so I usually just kind of look through the list that they give and decide which one sounds the most interesting. And then sometimes it sits on my Kindle for a while because I don't read that fast to get through all the digital books and physical books that I want to read. But This one sat there a while, and I picked it up because I hadn't read anything of a historical fiction nature in a while. And I don't know if it was the premise of the book or if it was just I wasn't in the mood. I'm not sure, but it took forever to get through it. It was about Beethoven, more so, not so much about Beethoven. So it's about this woman that falls in love with Beethoven, and just her entire life as a young girl being in love with him, as she gets older, and the way that they keep crossing paths, and how he starts to go deaf, and all of these things. And it was another one of those books where I just felt like it just went on forever. And supposedly she's the woman who inspired the Moonlight Sonata that he wrote, which is why it's called The Woman in the Moonlight. But it just, I don't know, it never felt like a love story, which I feel like the description made it seem like a love story. It definitely felt historical, but more fiction than historical. I don't know, there was just kind of a weirdness to it. I didn't dislike it, but again, I struggle with books that just seem to go on and on and on. And I just like a book to get me there, wherever it's taken me, I like to get there. And that doesn't have to be a short book. You saw The Bee Sting. That book took a long time to get where it was going, but it was worth it at the end. The Woman in the Moonlight didn't feel worth it at the end to me. After that book, I read The Quiet People by Paul Cleave. This was recommended to me by one of my book friends, Alyssa, and she, I guess, read it, but right away she was like, Susie, you would love this book. So I stumbled on a copy. Oh no, I think my husband got this for me for my birthday last year. And even though it was more of a recent acquisition, I really wanted to read it after it came so highly recommended from somebody who knows my my book tastes very well. It was so good, and not disturbing, like gross and gory or twisted, but no, maybe twisted. It was disturbing, kind of twisted. Like some of the things the characters do in this book, I'm like, what are you doing? Like, why would you do that? So it's about these two authors who are both murder mystery writers. They're a married couple. They write these murder mysteries, and then their son goes missing. And a lot of the book, they're accused of killing their son, and everybody believes that they did it because they're so good at writing murder mysteries, they could easily cover it up. And of course, they deny it the entire time. You do find out what happened, but man, when I tell you this book was awesomely twisted, it was awesomely twisted. I definitely recommend this book. This is also another book I could see myself rereading. This was also 5 stars. And, just heads up, kids are involved. And some not great things happen to some kids in here. So just be aware, if you stay away from those books, this will not be for you. But I loved it. The next book I read was The Lost Bookshop by Evie Woods. Another book that I picked up because the cover was beautiful. I think I got this at Costco one day. So I know Costco doesn't sell books anymore. I'll cry later. But I don't like Costco. Not anything against Costco. I just don't like being there. I don't like shopping there. I get overwhelmed, and there's always people crashing into people, or almost crashing into people, and the size of all the packages. I don't know. I just don't like going to Costco. But my husband likes me to go with him, so he has some company. So the deal was always, jokingly, can I get a book? And he'd say yeah, and sometimes I'd find something and sometimes I wouldn't, and sometimes I'd find something and change my mind and leave it there. But this one was so pretty, and the spine is so beautiful too. Gosh, guys, I'm a sucker for a gorgeous spine, more so than sprayed edges. I know some people love the sprayed edges. I am a spine girl. Give me a beautiful spine any day. This also has gold foiling all over the front of it, and this book is kind of like a fantasy mystery, but without like dragons and all that stuff. There's a little bit of magic to it, but there's basically this bookshop, and it's not where it's supposed to be. And there's this character who is determined to find this bookshop. And there are other characters who have some sort of connection or clues as to where this bookshop is. And that's about as much as I can remember. I gave this book 4 stars. I can't honestly remember why. I don't think it blew me away the way a 5-star book needs to blow me away to be 5 stars. But it definitely was a sweet story, definitely a cute read. I have a friend, Amanda, who this is right up her alley. I think she would really enjoy this book. So The Lost Bookshop. I do have Evie Wood's other book called The Story Collector, also an equally beautiful spine. So once I get to that, I'll be looking forward to seeing if it holds up to this one, or if the writing's about the same, or maybe I'm hoping it's a little bit better than this one. The next book I read was a nonfiction book, and it was called Jellyfish Age Backwards. And yes, part of the reason why I read this book was because it had jellyfish in the title. So it totally caught my eye. This was an audiobook I listened to, and as I was swiping through my app, I saw it, it caught my eye. But really why I read it was I liked the idea of what this book was about. So the write-up for it kind of presented itself as a study into some of these animals in nature that live these tremendously long lives. So for example, like giant land tortoises and macaw parrots and the immortal jellyfish, which if you're not too familiar, I would look into it. It basically can revert. It can basically revert itself back into I cannot think of the word right now, but basically its startup cells again and grow itself again whenever it's scared. And so that's why they call it the immortal jellyfish. So of course it can die like every other living thing, but it has this odd ability to revert itself back to a more of a, not a younger stage, I cannot think of the word, more of a original stage of its life, I guess is the best way to say it. So anyway, I thought that this book was going to be a lot about that and the study of these animals that have this longevity and how do they do that. The book ended up being more about how scientists have studied different animals and how they've tried to apply their longevity to making us live a longer life as humans. I will be honest, I hope I live a nice, long, happy life. I have no interest in extending my life and living abnormally long. If I hit 100, that would be amazing. I don't need to hit anything longer than that. I think that's a pretty full life. But it talked a lot about different cells in our bodies and what the cells do and how those cells keep us alive and how those cells don't help us keep alive. And like a lot of science, and this isn't ragging on science, but there's just a lot of circularness to it. Whereas we need this to make this happen, but because this happens, it inhibits this from happening. So if we get rid of the first stage, now this thing here doesn't happen, but neither does this here. And it was not really hard to follow as an audiobook. But I think just overall, it was not what I was anticipating. I wasn't looking for a book about how we're trying to help humans live longer. I was more curious about the animal world and how the animal world manages to live that long, whether it's surviving predators or what they eat or whatever. So a lot of talk about scientists and fruit flies and scientists and I think it was naked mole rats, which is all fine and dandy too. And I think it's pretty interesting, especially the part about reproduction in fruit flies. I thought that was fascinating. But yeah, it just wasn't what I was planning on. So I did give that 3 stars. I think if that's your field or your interest is in human longevity, highly recommended. I thought it was well done and easy to understand, but it wasn't what I was looking for. After that, I read Life of Pi, which I had been looking for a nice copy of this at thrift stores for probably a year or so. And this one I found at a thrift store. And what I love about this version is it just has these amazing illustrations in there. So the paper's a little heavier. It's kind of more like magazine quality paper. I know it comes in a paperback version too, but it's funny, at the time, all the paperback versions I found were beat up and they were kind of a mess. And like I said, I'm a spine girl, so if the spine is cracked, it's a no for me, straight out of the gate. But I thought this copy was beautiful, and I just thought it was a good way to read the story in a book that was a little different than other books that I read, which usually don't have colorful illustrations. I love the movie. I think it is one of the most beautiful movies I've ever seen visually. And I just love the story so much. And so I was curious how well the movie did compared to the book. And to be honest, I would say it's pretty good. I mean, I'm sure there are people out there with different opinions, but I really thought they did a great job with the movie, especially bringing so much of what he describes here to life visually. I just thought it was a phenomenal read. So if you haven't read this one, I would go ahead and give this a try. I'm also considering this a modern classic. I Googled that. Google agreed that it is a modern classic. So I'm considering that my second classic of the year. And those of you that are purists, don't worry. I have some what I would consider to be true classics on my list this year too. I just haven't gotten to them yet. The next book I read was another audiobook. This one was Into the Jungle, and it was by the same author that wrote The River at Night, which I read last year, also on audiobook. I really loved this book. I gave it 4 stars. I've also learned, in addition to audiobooks with accents, I just love stories about people living in jungles. I don't know why. I think, especially if I feel like it's real. If someone writes about being in the jungle and they leave out all the bugs and the animals and the heat and the nasty water and the mud, and I don't care about those jungle books. But if someone's writing a book and they're talking about how their body gets infected with a parasite, this sounds terrible. But like the reality, like we know if you live in the Amazon jungle, you're probably going to get infected with some sort of parasite, right? So I like that when it's real. And this book was about a girl who, I think she was living in a hostel and working in a hostel. I feel like it was in Brazil. It was somewhere around there. Near the Amazon. I know the Amazon's huge, so it's somewhere where the Amazon is, in South America. And she meets this guy and falls in love with him, and he's like a native in the Amazon, or has family that's natives in the Amazon. So they get married. He takes her back to the Amazon, and as far as I know, she is just your straight up white American girl, like definitely not built for the Amazon. And I hope that doesn't offend anybody. I'm just trying to draw a contrast here between who she is in the book and who he is in the book. And she says it herself a lot in the book, that this is not her life, and she would give anything for a McDonald's cheeseburger, whereas I don't know if he's ever had a McDonald's cheeseburger. So I hope that makes sense. But she, anyway, she marries him, and she really, God bless her, she gives it a go. Like, she lives in this jungle, and he's returning to the jungle to help his family hunt down, I don't think it's a tiger, maybe a panther. Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry, guys. This is why I need to do my reviews sooner than 2 months later. But they're basically hunting this animal that attacked and killed a boy in the village. I think it was a boy. So anyway, they end up going there. She meets these villagers. They take her in. She gets pregnant. But there's some bad stuff going on in the jungle. There's some poachers and some other things, and parasites. And so yeah, it's just about her struggle to survive in the jungle. And I think what I love the most about this book is that she really does go for it. I whatever it's worth, she doesn't chicken out and bail, and she doesn't pull the ew gross card over and over. Like, she says she's in it, and she means what she says. And I had a lot of respect for the character for that. Didn't love the ending so much, so I think that's why I gave it 4 stars. I mean, a lot of times my star ratings are based on how do I feel at the end of the book. But it's funny, sitting here right now, not being able to remember why I gave it 4 stars, I would say that at least warrants it a 4.5, because walking away from it, I just remember really enjoying it as an audiobook. I was finally able to get to this Riley Sager book, the only one left. My friend Alyssa really loves this book. I've heard a lot of good things about this book. So this girl gets a job working at this mansion on top of a cliff that's falling into the ocean. And there's just a lot of mystery around this lady who's living there. So the lady who's still living there was accused of killing her family decades ago, and now she's an old lady. And so the girl ends up working for her, like as her companion, not so much her nurse. I feel like it was more like her companion. And as the girl's working there, she starts to uncover like some of the backstory there of what actually happened to the woman's sister and parents, who were brutally murdered all those years ago. And it definitely has some twists. Riley Sager is very good at putting those twists in the story. I really liked it. I gave it 4 stars. Again, a thriller has to blow me away to get 5 stars. I mean, it has to be so different than anything else I've read. I can't see the twists coming if I'm going to give it 5 stars. So this one did give 4 stars, but I think it was one of the better thrillers for sure. Then I read one more audiobook in January, and it was On a Quiet Street. And another kind of popcorn thriller where just a lot of different characters on the street, their different lives, how they're intertwined with each other, how they're there for each other. I don't want to say too much else about it because I feel like even saying too much about the characters might give too much away. But if I remember right, there's a young mom with a baby. There's somebody else who wants a baby. I could be mixing this up with another book now that I'm saying it out loud. And since it was audiobook, I don't have it in front of me to check the back cover. But I do remember that it's supposed to be this idyllic street. And basically, as you would expect, every house has its own secrets. And those secrets start to come out. I really enjoyed this one. I gave this 4 stars also. Really recommend this book. I'm sorry I can't remember more about it, but I really do remember that I liked how the author overlaid the characters and how these neighbors that sort of superficially knew each other, I loved how in the end they were able to be there and support each other when one of those neighbors had a very severe need that she couldn't talk about. And I don't want to say too much more about that. I love how these women in the neighborhood who didn't know her very well and didn't have to keep her secret, I just love how they all just rose up and joined her and supported her. And I thought that was really cool. A lot of books don't do that. Secrets are kept secret, or people don't want to get involved, or they don't know enough of the story to get involved. I just loved how these women just jumped right in and took what this lady said for face value, and this is it, we're helping her out. That was pretty cool. The last book I read in January, I actually don't have with me right now, even though I read it in print, and it was Crazy for the Storm. And this is a book by Norman Ollistead. I'm looking. Yes, Norman Ollistead. This was another one of those books where I thought it was about one thing and it was more about something else. This was the only memoir that I read this month. I found this in a little free library in my neighborhood. It was not for me. I gave it 2 stars. I did finish it, but I've already since passed it on to a little free library again for someone else who might hopefully enjoy it more. So this boy, Norman, was in a plane crash when he was a kid in the mountains in California, like Northern California, somewhere around there. And basically everybody in the plane dies. It's a little plane. So there were, I think, 3 adults and him. All 3 adults die. And now I want to say he was 6 years old. He might've been 8 years old, somewhere in there. And he basically has to get down this snowy mountain by himself, and survive by himself. Now, that sounded phenomenal to me. I always want to know, how do people do that? How do they survive in the forest? I watch all of those shows like Naked and Afraid, Alone, and oh gosh, I can't even think. I'm watching Extracted right now. Like, I love these stories about people and how they survive out in the wilderness. But the book wasn't mostly about that. I was kind of bummed. I don't want to give anything away in case you want to read it, but a lot of the book was about his childhood. And now, granted, it does tell you on the back of the book that the strength his dad pushed into him through competitive surfing and competitive skiing is what helped him get down the mountain. But I felt like the way the story was told, you had this one side of the story where he's getting down the mountain as a child. Sorry, there's something tickling my nose. And then you have the other side of the story where he tells all these stories about how his dad challenged him. Oh my goodness. Okay, there was something just tickling my face. So you have this story where he's getting down the mountain as a child, and then you have all the stories of when he was a child and his dad was pushing him to surf when he didn't want to, or ski when he didn't want to. I never felt like that connected very well. I mean, obviously those things helped him get through his ordeal, but his ordeal didn't last very long. It was such a small part of the book. He was not on, I don't know. I don't want to give away too much, but I gave this book 2 stars and I did end up just getting rid of it. It wasn't what I expected. I wanted more of a story of how did this kid survive in the woods? How did he eat stuff? How did he stay warm because it was winter? And it just wasn't a lot of that at all, unfortunately. And the rest of it was cool, and what his dad did and how he grew up and he was surfing and all that was cool. But I have no schema for surfing. I have a little schema for skiing, but a lot of his chapters were very descriptive surfing terms of waves and things. And while I'm a South Florida girl, I grew up down there, I know about the beach and the ocean and the waves, I don't know about surfing. So a lot of that I kind of skimmed over because I wasn't going to get anything out of that. I wasn't going to remember any of it. And I didn't feel like when he told the parts of the story about getting off the mountain, he didn't draw on those memories. He didn't draw on that strength. It just, because he had those memories and that strength, he was able to get down the mountain. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, those are the books for January. Leave a comment below in the box if you have read any of these. I would love to know your thoughts, whether you loved them, hated them, or were somewhere in the middle. Or if you were interested in reading any of these and have some questions about them, please let me know. Talking about books is truly one of my very favorite things in the world to talk about. So have a great day. Bye.